And of course they did boots and saddles. Um, there was another young man that opened a little shop that was just strictly a boot shop. And he didn't stay very long. He, I guess, come in and not having a lot of money to start with, and things didn't get rolling real quick for him, so he he closed up and moved on to other things. Um, Whites did a lot of work for the rodeo companies, rodeo cowboys, and the producers. Gene Autry owned the Flying A Rodeo Company. They were the company that put on the rodeos at Madison Square Garden and a lot of the other big rodeos around. Everett Colburn is the one that run the rodeo company for Gene Autry. Gene Autry come around as a celebrity, but he was never there as managing a portion of the business. He left all of that up to Everett Colburn. There was a large wall, I'm gonna say, 40, 50 foot long, down the side of one wall of the Western store. And it was all covered with photographs, 8 by 10 photographs, some of them 5 by 7, some of them even bigger than that. And it was a prestige thing for the cowboy to sign a photograph and put it on the wall. So there were a lot, I don't know, maybe close to 200 pictures on that wall. Most of them were signed by the cowboy. A lot of the cowboys that went on to be champions had their picture there before they ever made it big time in the rodeo. But that was a thing, that was just a thing with the cowboys to have their picture on the wall in the all-white shop. They did, I don't know whether they did all of them or not, but they did a lot of boots for Gene Autry. We made a few saddles for him. We made all of the trophy saddles for the Madison Square Garden Rodeo. It was billed as the World's Championship Rodeo. And it was years before I found out that that wasn't the finals for the rodeo cowboys at the end of each year. I thought that was the year-end big deal, but it wasn't. But they did a good job of promoting it as the World Championship Rodeo. There was a lot of pictures of the groups. At the Madison Square Garden, they took group pictures of all of the cowboys and all of the performers, all the stock contractor, and a lot of celebrities that come and was involved in it. Roy Rogers was involved in them. Gene Autry was involved in them. Mainly, I don't remember seeing anybody that I recognized in the pictures other than Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. But one of them was in nearly every one. Then they would have photographs of the champions and their saddles that they won. There was pictures of the championship saddles before they were shipped from the shop. They would display them and take pictures of them. There was a few children that was doing trick riding or handling cattle or something like that. There was a few children's pictures in there. There were some ranch pictures in there. Not very many, but a few. It was very interesting to to go to look at all of them because there was some good pictures. All of them were good, just some of them were better than others. Lewis was a character. He liked to have fun, he liked to cut up, but also he was a cantankerous feller. And he had a temper. Later on in years, I met, after Lewis died, Vic and Lewis both died within a year. In fact, Lewis, Vic, and their saddle maker at that time, all three of them died within the same year. As far as they knew, there was nothing connected. It just happened to be that way. So Lewis's wife bought out Vic's wife's portion of the shop, and she was going to run it. She was going to keep it going. So she was telling me years later about some of the things that happened to Lewis and the things that he got into because of his temper. He said when he was just getting started in the boot part of it, he had worked all morning. This guy the customer was supposed to come pick up a pair of boots, and he didn't have them finished. And he worked real hard all morning, finishing them out. Back then, they didn't have the finishers, the sanding machines and stuff, so he did all of that by hand. Hand sandpaper, and back then they used glass a lot to shave and to smooth. They'd break a piece of glass and use the sharp edge to shave leather to form it, especially in the arch, the way they wanted it. And they would rub it with rub sticks to polish it. It was just all did by hand, and there was no machines. I think they had a stitcher at the time. But anyway, he worked all morning on that pair of boots. Really, he said, Miss White said he really was trying to make them look good, because this was either a real good customer or he was wanting him as a real good customer. Anyway, he was trying to impress him. And back then they still had hitching posts on the street. They had watering troughs scattered out along the street for the horses. When they tied them, they could water them. So I don't think there was very many that took advantage of it at that time, but they were still there. And so this guy, he come in, put his boots on, paid for them, went on about how nice they looked, and went outside and stepped over into that water trough. And back then they thought that because all boots were made the same, you know, a guy that wore a 8.5 and a 9.5, they might have to buy the same size boot. And so most of the old timers thought they had to fit their boot to their feet. And the way they did that, they would get them real wet and wear them until they dried. And the saddle's the same way. Back then, a lot of people would take a brand new saddle and throw it in a water trough and let it get real wet, then put it on the horse and ride it all day long. And that's the way they kind of broke them in to fit theirself, you know. But anyway, that habit had followed into the era when they were making boots to fit an individual, so it wasn't necessary. But anyway, this guy did that. And it took two guys to hold Lewis. He was going to go out there and whip him. And they said he would have. And I can relate to that. I've spent a lot of time on things um, trying to make it look real good, and find out later that the person that bought it could care less. It was strictly a tool or something for them to use, and they didn't care. They didn't try to take care of it. I've saw saddles that I've made that were 3 or 4 years old. It looked like they were 20. Oh, it. If that's what they want, then that's you can't. As long as they pay for it, you can't. You gotta let go of it there. There was a time also, this guy come in and talked to Lewis about a saddle, and he come in several times. He knew the man, and he'd come in several times talking to Lewis about a saddle. Getting one made. Well, he didn't hear from him for a while. So sometime later he come in dragging this saddle. And Lewis asked him, "What you got?" He said, "I got me a dandy saddle." Said, "I went to Mexico and bought me a saddle." And he said, "You just can't believe how cheap they are down there." And back then, the saddles coming out of Mexico were to look at. They weren't to use. They were built strictly to look at. And there was no strength to them. The leather would stink. You put one in the house, and that's what they were made for, just to look at, and put it in the house, and the whole house would get to where it stunk something terrible because of the smell of the leather that they used. But anyway, he brought this in, and he said, "Lewis, I wonder if you'd work on this saddle for me." He says, "I don't understand it." Said, "I put it on the horse the first time and stepped in the stirrup, and the stirrup leather broke. And wonder if you'd fix it." Said, "Looks," walked over, yanked the saddle out of his hand, threw it over in the corner, and grabbed him by the collar and took him out the front door and told him, says, "Don't you ever step foot in this store again." And that guy never would come back. He never would come back for his saddle. Lewis, I guess, convinced him that he didn't need to come back. But that's the way Lewis was. He had some funny ways, but he was, could be exciting at times. He was, I heard stories later that they really, when they decided to open the Western store part, that they really didn't have the money to do that. I saw some files years later. I saw some files where they'd filed their taxes back then, and they didn't make very much a year, I guarantee you. And but anyway, they wanted to open this Western store, so they convinced enough people to give them credit to put stuff to fill that store. And they said it took them a long time to finally pay off all of their debts from that. And from what I understand, there was some that never got paid. But they got a Western store started. Lewis, he had a lot of nerve. They had a huge a rope that they decorated around. The ceiling was about 12-foot ceiling, and up about 8 foot they had a paneling type finish on some of the wall, and it went up about 8 foot, but there was a cap on the top of that paneling, but that same board went on all the way around the building, even though there was no paneling there, but it was a trim. They used it as a trim. And it was probably a 3/4 inch board. But right under that piece of trim, they laid a rope that I know was at least 1.25 inches thick, and they nailed that all around the building, right underneath that trim. And that was the largest piece of rope at that time I had ever seen. I thought, man, it took somebody to use that as a lariat rope, but it wasn't a lariat rope. It was some kind of rope, probably used around ships or something like that. But they found that somewhere and thought that would be a neat trim to go to decorate the store with. I remember the cash register they had there. That thing had 6 drawers in it, cash drawers. Great big old thing. It was probably almost 3 foot high and 2.5 foot wide. It had a big old crank on the side of it. And you punched in the keys, the amount, and the drawer you wanted, and cranked it, and then that drawer popped out, and you did your change thing, or put the money in, or took it out, or whatever. But there was 6 different drawers. Big old brass thing. Man, real fancy. I understood that they turned down a lot of money for that thing. They just wouldn't sell it. They thought it was neat to have in the store, I guess. Oh, there was just, while I worked there, I didn't work there, but I don't know, maybe